One of the top reasons citizens contact their municipal governments is noise complaints. And it's not just about being bothered by loud sounds such as construction or traffic. Increasingly, it's also a health concern. With us to explain, in London, Ontario, Tor Oiamo, professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at Toronto Metropolitan University. And here in our studio, Ingrid Buday, founder of No More Noise Toronto. Hi to you both.
Hello, thank you.
Ingrid, I noticed you've got some props for us. We're going to actually talk about what it is that you have. But Tor, I wanted to start with you. Can you give us an idea of how loud our cities are in this province?
That's a good question. We're really just starting to get a good idea of that. We've done some mapping citywide as well as locally, but just in terms of levels, it's difficult to quantify, but what we think about normally is the proportion of people that might be exposed to excessive levels. And in Toronto, for example, over 90% of people exceed nighttime noise level limits that are recommended by the WHO.
Well, how would you define excessive noise? Because I think a lot of us, you might have that one neighbor who might be mowing the lawn when you're trying to, get ready for dinner. But how do you define excessive noise, Tor?
Yeah, so this is a bit disciplinary, I suppose, where I work. As you said, most of us can relate to noise, and we'll think about perhaps acute things like dogs barking or construction noise over a short period of time that's disturbing us, something that prevents us from sleep now and then. But I think about, and my colleagues and I, we work on noise that happens over prolonged periods of time and tends to then over time continue to cause stress levels to increase, and then there's a cascade of health effects downstream from that we can observe.
Ingrid, I'm going to ask you what you have here, but first I wanted to ask you a question about the work that you do. You're actually the founder of a group trying to cut the excessive noise in Toronto. Why is this issue important to you?
This issue is important to me because I live in the city, and I'm entitled to live in the city, and people are modifying their vehicles and racing on our streets, which wakes me up on a nightly basis. And so when I was starting to study noise and I saw the noise models that Tor and the researchers have produced, they are absolutely valid and they are great for decision making. But what I found was that they didn't actually portray what I live with at the bedroom window, and that is these noise spikes that come from these intermittent noise sources. And I decided to research it, learn a little bit more, and find out what I can do.
You used an interesting word there. You said you're entitled to live in the city, because I guess the argument can be made that if you don't like the city noise, move somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Right? And,
yeah.
You say no. Where do you live in the city?
So I live close to the Gardiner.
So highway.
And in a dense urban area that also has arterial streets running through it, like Queen or King. And so there is both noise that comes from the highway, but also noise that comes from the arterial streets. And I also wanted to understand the difference between highway noise and because most people live on arterials, and what that noise level is like.
Well, what is the difference? Why is it important to know the difference?
So highways can put out like a hum, and that's where the noise modeling and the mapping will show that if you look at the highways all around Toronto, they are anywhere from 80 to 90 to 100 decibels. And Tor and his team, they map that, and so you can see that difference. But that only shows this high level hum. But when that hum goes away, so for example, I had a noise meter on the side of the Gardiner when they closed it for the Ride for Brain Health. All of a sudden, that high level went away, and we could see all these individual noise spikes that people live with. And so even though when everybody knows when you're sitting beside a highway, you hear that hum, but then you can still hear that one single engine, that one siren, that one motorcycle racing. And so it's those spikes that don't necessarily show on those models because those are averaged over time.
Well, Tor, Ingrid mentioned that you are studying this, and we know that there's a housing crunch, not just in this province, but across the country, and a lot of people are living in denser areas. How does these noise spikes, how do they impact us beyond just being an annoyance? How do they impact our health, Tor?
Yeah, so I don't want to get into sort of the nitty gritty of noise modeling and how these spikes are absorbed by the way we represent data on a large scale like a city. But they do, of course, coincide with wherever you have, in general, a lot of traffic noise, you're probably also going to have a lot of these traffic noise spikes. So there's definitely some correlation there. So we're able to map out, and likely those spikes are causing some of those health concerns, health outcomes that we see. So as we're familiar with individually, these things like annoyance and sleep disturbance, I think, are well known and easy to understand. But as I mentioned briefly earlier, when those things happen over a long period of time, we can have these chronic stress responses in our bodies, and over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it can be different lengths of time for different people. It's not sort of a hard and fast number, but we're seeing over long periods of time in longitudinal studies that these stress responses, when they're happening over and over and over again, can lead to things like ischemic heart disease or just heart disease in general, increased blood pressure. We're also seeing more downstream outcomes on things like diabetes. Stroke has also been shown to be correlated with traffic noise too now. So there's a lot of pretty severe outcomes, and again, not really happening in the way that a lot of us think about noise as a nuisance and a disturbance, but over sort of an insidious exposure over many years.
Ingrid, I see you nodding because I guess if you're not getting a good night's sleep, it does have these ripple effects on your health in the long run.
Absolutely, it does. So it was during COVID when the streets were kind of empty and you could hear the racing and the modified cars. Eventually, I started to have my own anxiety come up because I was like, okay, I have to get up for work at 5:30 in the morning. What if I've only fallen asleep at 3? Because these guys race throughout the night, and this happens throughout the night. And so that's where noise at the bedroom window. It's so important to study that, and that can only happen through citizen engagement, because researchers can't necessarily do that. And so for me, I started to really feel this stress and anxiety. I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety before, and so I managed to, manage that. But this is the kind of thing that comes up, that noise exasperates those kind of issues. And you were talking about people and people that have suffered from head injuries, people that have had strokes, people that are blind. All of these people are affected by noise. And whatever issues people may have, this is another barrier to them properly functioning and having a healthy environment and being productive individuals.
It adds additional stress.
Adds additional stress.
What is it that you have? Can you explain to us?
Yeah, so I've got two things here. So this is an environmental noise meter. And so right now you can see that I'm talking at about 70, 71 decibels here. So this is what I placed outside my balcony. Or on my balcony to see what the noise spikes were, because I wanted to understand that. And so this records sound levels, and so it's not noise necessarily, it's sound levels. And the level of the sound level, so decibel level, is where it starts to
the pitch.
Yeah, and all of that. So that's when it starts to impact your health. When it's actually anything above 55 decibels has an impact to your health.
Really? Because we're talking at around 70, 75, and it seems fine, but that actually...
Yeah, and I would say that is how we are. This is human-centered noise, but when you have combustion engines and you have man-made noise, so to speak, that's when things start to, like that constant hum and also the frequencies, make a difference. So this is one of the meters, and the other one is, this is from a company made in Canada here, Convergence Instruments, and these are the meters that were actually used for the Toronto Public Health study called How Loud is Too Loud. And so these just log the data, and they run on battery for 24/7.
Okay, I want to come back to you with what you do with that data, but I wanted to get an idea of how cities in Ontario compare to other jurisdictions. Tor, how do we compare the noise level to other countries?
We actually don't really have a lot of good data on that. So the European region, for example, is definitely at the forefront of this globally. So they have made a requirement decades ago now that every city with more than 100,000 people has to, every 5 years, do detailed strategic mapping of noise, they call it, and get an idea of how many people and in what areas are exposed to excessive levels. And from there on then can have a national or even regional understanding of the issue and how they're progressing towards reducing that. We don't have those kinds of initiatives in Ontario or Canada, for that matter. There's been some of that work done by myself and colleagues doing mapping at the citywide scale and getting these sort of strategic noise maps in place where we can get an understanding of the issue on a large scale. But in short, we don't really have the requirements or the funding or the support or the needs to do this at this large scale. But there's definitely an interest, and we're making progress in getting better understanding of it.
Well, cities like Paris and New York City are both using noise cameras to find people who make excessive noise. Tor, can you explain to us how it works? We have an image here on the screen, and essentially it looks, and Tor, you can correct me, it looks like a ball with a bunch of attachments coming out with cameras and microphones, and it's called the Medusa?
Sure, yeah. So essentially it'll have a noise sensor that's able to target and with some level of confidence, of course, what it's trying to measure, which might be the vehicle passing by, or hopefully just the vehicle passing by. And then it's able to take a picture of the license plate and likely send them a ticket in the mail. So pretty similar to a speed camera, but really in this case, measuring excessive noise levels.
How successful has it been?
It's a interesting deterrent. I think it was tested in a Canadian city. They found that because it didn't really have the legal teeth at that point yet, people were actually going up and making noise on purpose around it to see how loud they can be. Mm-hmm. But as far as I understand, in cities where it's been implemented more permanently and integrated into legal framework, of course, there are going to be deterrents when people get a ticket in the mail.
Ingrid, Tor mentioned that we don't really have the data, and you also mentioned that this is something that has to be led by citizens. Is there a little bit of frustration? Because if you're living this day to day, this is something that impacts your life 24/7, but maybe people who are making the policies are not aware of how bad it is.
I would agree with that, and that's where noise drops off very quickly. So if you have a couple buildings in the way, you have a nice leafy tree, you have a treed environment, you don't have those issues. And back to Tor's comment about the teeth, so the noise bylaws that we have in Toronto were up for review pre-COVID, and then the excessive vehicle noise and the small combustion engine bylaws were put on hold until last spring, when the city basically said that they were going to revisit those. So we spoke about them in the summer, and the city council debated them, and the city had recommendations. One of them was a pilot for a noise camera system, and then the councillors also had recommendations for that. It was supposed to be reviewed again this spring, but now they've pushed it to Q4 of this year, 2023. So what that does for me is the data that I'm collecting, both through the noise meters and also through an app where people can log noise complaints, is so that we actually have a proper data set. When many people will know, if they've tried to call 311 regarding a noise complaint, the car's already gone. It doesn't work. And that's where the city bylaw officers are the ones trained with the sound meters, but they need to work with the police to stop the car. So it's one of those things where it's really easy to go, oh, well, we can't do this because of this, and we can't do that. And so they do this finger pointing. And the police themselves have said it is not worth our time to do blitzes against excessive vehicle vehicle modifications, because the bylaws aren't strong enough.
How does that make you feel?
Actually, it makes me excited, to be honest, because that means there's a window. There's a window of time, and there's enough people that are frustrated with the process, and there's enough people that are frustrated with the situation, that I'm hoping that's going to galvanize them, and hopefully the tools that I'm providing and the services that I'm providing provide the data so that you can only make good decisions from good data. And 311 at this point is not providing accurate data.
I love that. That should be on a t-shirt. You can only make good decisions with good data.
I used to work with data, so I get that.
Tor, we mentioned housing earlier. The province's housing plan involves putting a lot of new homes on major streets, especially in areas they call, quote, transit-oriented communities. Given what we know and the impact of noise on our health, is that a mistake?
Not necessarily. We we have made pretty good progress over the last few decades in guidelines and building codes that help ensure that living areas and bedrooms and homes are not supposed to exceed certain levels. And if there's a possibility of that, it's baked into it that there has to be additional noise isolation put into the building. So moving forward, I certainly see opportunities to improve the framework, the regulation around buildings, but we have the materials, we have the technology, we have the know-how to put these things in the same locations, and it's impossible to avoid doing that with the needs to densify cities in general. But the bigger problem for me is really all the buildings that have been left behind, where there's not going to be funds available or ability to retrofit them to reduce noise exposures for residents within them. But yeah, I think for many reasons we have to densify, and we're going to have this mix of people and noise in cities. We just need to make sure that, of course, our living areas, and particularly sleeping areas, are protected. And as I mentioned, there's good frameworks on paper. Whether or not they're enforced is like a different story, I suppose.
I've got 2 minutes left, but I wanted to just have a quick follow-up. I think some people might argue that there's not enough regulations when it comes to noise. So how would you design a healthy but dense neighborhood, Tor?
Yeah, so to the first part of that, what we're missing, in my view, is really a lawful restriction on indoor noise levels. We do not have that in Canada or Ontario. So there's quite a few loopholes where developments, road expansions are allowed to increase noise levels by a certain amount. If it seems impossible to keep noise levels to the guidelines set by the province, then they can be given a pass. There's a lot of loopholes like that. So if we're just able to get to a point where we set firm lawful requirements for indoor levels, then we'd get a lot farther ahead. But that aside, how do we design these neighborhoods? We know a lot. We can borrow a lot from planning principles that are already being used, like new urbanism, where transit and active transportation focused neighborhoods will make a good difference or impact on reducing noise levels too. So is it likely that we're going to get rid of cars and traffic altogether? Of course not. But we can certainly do a better job of separating these things from where people live and work.
Ingrid, I'll let you have the last word.
Thank you so much. So when I started researching noise, I remember reading a document and they said that we cannot mitigate noise at the source. And I went, no, we can. So on a federal level, cars are tested to be 85 decibels. So once that car gets on a vehicle, then the provincial laws take over, and that's where there is no maximum decibel level of vehicles, and that's wrong. So I think that we can just, if those laws can carry through, and that we have an 85 decibel level maximum across the board, that would be super easy to enforce. And it's also then it's the federal guidelines. And back to Tor, there is just so many things legally that can be done. Environmental Protection Act, we have a right to a healthy environment. That bill was just passed. So I think that we are in a great place right now to make some significant changes so that everybody can have a better night's sleep.
And maybe, too, the people who are participating with these, who are making the noise, maybe if they understand more on the impact of noise on their neighbors, maybe they'll change their behaviors, hopefully.
Let's hope. Let's hope. Education is a big piece, and thank you for this segment, because you're helping with that.
We appreciate it. Tor, Ingrid, thank you so much for helping us understand this better. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.